Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Leonhardt, if an agent stateside were soliciting a prostitute that was provided by a drug conspiracy he was investigating, what punishment would you recommend?
I can't recommend a punishment. I would just hope that would be thoroughly investigated. And
so you're telling me nobody cares what the administrator of the DEA thinks should happen to an agent? You're powerless to express your opinion. You have no First Amendment right when it comes to who works for your agency.
I have expressed my opinion in a number of ways.
What did you express? What did you think the proper sanction was?
Last year, I sent email and I sent a memo to every employee in DEA and put them on notice that this kind of conduct was not acceptable.
My question must have been ambiguous because I wasn't talking about future conduct. I was talking about past conduct. What punishment did you recommend for conduct that happened in the past?
Under the civil service law, I cannot recommend a penalty. I can't intervene in the disciplinary process. I can't even make a recommendation.
What does it take to get, hypothetically, what would it take to get fired as a DEA agent? Because the agents I used to work with were worried about using their car to go pick up dry cleaning. They were actually worried about using their OGV to pick up dry cleaning. They were worried about being disciplined. So apparently that world has changed. Do you know whether any of the prostitutes were underage?
I don't know that.
Would that impact whatever recommendation you might have in terms of a sanction?
I don't recommend the sanction. I can't fire. I can't recommend a penalty. There's a guide that the deciding officials abide by, and they have a penalty guide that they look at. And the penalty guide for this kind of activity is anything from reprimand to removal.
How about security clearance? Do you have any impact over that, whether or not an agent has a security clearance?
No, there's adjudicative guidelines, and that has to be adjudicated by the security people.
What power do you have? You have to work with agents over whom you can't discipline and have no control, and you have no control over the security clearance. What the hell do you get to do?
What I can do is build on and improve mechanisms to make sure that the outcome is what we believe the outcome should be. And that is what happened in Cartagena. That is what's going to happen moving forward.
Inspector General Horowitz, I find that stunning. Let me ask you this. Did the agents know that the cartels were providing the prostitutes?
What we found, Congressman, from looking in the file was that they should have known, given their trained law enforcement agents, and they were dealing with corrupt law enforcement, local law enforcement, that was providing them with the prostitutes as well as the various gifts.
Were they supposed to be investigating these cartels?
They were.
So they are receiving prostitutes from cartels that they are supposed to be investigating. And she can't fire those agents. You agree with her? She can't fire them?
I think as a matter of Title V, she can't directly intervene and fire them. I do think one of the concerns we outline in the report as to DEA and the other 3 agencies is how they adjudicate these cases. They undercharge them in some instances. And so at DEA, for example, sexual harassment, if you're charged with that, there's only one punishment: removal. But if you're charged with conduct unbecoming or poor judgment, which isn't even actually a category, then you've got a range of penalties. And so one of the issues, as you know as a former prosecutor, is how you charge the case. And that has a consequence.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what would need to be done, but I, like my friend from South Carolina, find it stunning that you can solicit prostitutes. Administrator Leonhardt, do we know whether any of the prostitutes were underage? Do we know whether any of them were part of any human trafficking rings?
Because the Bogota case happened a decade ago, there were no interviews of prostitutes. On the more recent one, the Cartagena one, it did not identify an age for the prostitute involved.
Mr. Chairman, I would just find it impossible to explain to any reasonable-minded person how an agent cannot be disciplined for soliciting prostitutes from drug cartels that they were ostensibly investigating. I find that stunning.
If the gentleman will yield.
On her way, Mr. Conyers is with us. We have a nice group on our side, and I know Chairman Goodlatte, this means a lot to him as well. So we will we'll work the openings in as people come, and I will recognize myself for my opening. I want to thank you again for being here today. This is our second hearing in a series to examine the Justice Department and its component agencies to identify areas where we can make our justice system both fully respected and fully worthy of respect. So I want to thank both of you, not just for being here today, but also for your long, distinguished careers in public service, which we will go into in more detail when you're introduced. As we all know, the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives plays a critical role in protecting the safety and security of our communities. If you'll allow me just a brief moment of personal indulgence, as former prosecutors like to do from time to time, we'd like to reminisce on the last good job we had, which was being a prosecutor. And I can tell you two that what you remember are the victims and their courage and heroism. And you remember the men and women of law enforcement and their integrity. You forget about the bad rulings. You forget about the jury verdicts that didn't go your way. You even, after time, forget about the defense attorneys. But you don't ever forget the women and men that you work with in law enforcement, and especially the victims. So, Mr. Rosenberg, when I see DEA, of course I think of the nation's premier narcotics investigation entity, but I really think about the DEA agents whose name may never be known and never be called in a public hearing, but do the work. I won't call the names of the folks in South Carolina because I'm going to leave one of them out, but I would be very grateful if you could let the women and men who are still in DEA from yesterday and those that are there now know how grateful each of us across both sides of the aisle are for their work. And Mr. Brandon, the same to you. You and I know some ATF agents. We both know some of the same ones, and they remain some of the fondest memories that I have from that time period of my life. If you would let the folks in South Carolina know how grateful we are for their continued service, and those who once served in South Carolina but have spread out across the country, I'd be grateful to you for that. We have a lot of challenges. In my home state of South Carolina, at least 95 people died from heroin in 2015, which is almost twice as many as the previous year, and more than 500 died from abuse of prescription opioids over that same time period. Roughly half of these deaths attributed to drug overdose in South Carolina involved a synthetic opioid, which is almost 100 times more potent than morphine. And not only are we seeing an increase in deaths due to drug abuse, but we've also seen a recent spike in violent crime nationwide. To be fair, violent crime has been going down for a long time. And once it goes down so low, it only has one place to go. But I do think that we ought to be mindful of the fact that there has been, at least in certain categories as they keep statistics, something of a spike. In 2016, violent crime increased in many of our nation's largest cities, which is the second year that metro areas saw an increase in homicide, robbery, and aggravated assault. No agency is perfect. Congress certainly is not perfect, which may represent an understatement of biblical proportions, but it is our duty as an oversight body, as flawed as we are, to ensure that law enforcement agencies learn from mistakes, use taxpayer dollars responsibly and efficiently, remain committed to their core missions of protecting the American people. We have a justice system that is looked to by everyone for fairness, efficiency, thoroughness, professionalism, Public safety is, at least in my judgment, the preeminent function of government, inasmuch as it is a subset of national security, and at the state and local level, public safety may be tied with education as the preeminent function of government. So it's not only incredibly important, it's incredibly important how people perceive the system. It can be fair but not perceived that way, and we still have a problem. So I know that both of you feel that way, or you would not have devoted your lives to the pursuit of justice. Over the course of the next several months, I want to work with both of you, not just in public hearings, but also privately, to make sure that Congress is doing everything it can do to enable you to fulfill your missions, and also to reflect on your missions to make sure that we are pursuing the toughest where necessary and the smartest at all times policies we can, whether it is drug overdoses, narcotics trafficking, violent crimes, firearms trafficking, any other issue that impacts public safety and the well-being of our fellow citizens. I know that both of you, each of you, and each member of this committee wants not just the best, but the most respected justice system we can possibly have. And part of that is having frank conversations about sentencing laws and declination levels, 924Es, mental health, how it impacts your ability to do your job, how we as a society are treating mental health related issues. The justice system is, I was eating dinner with Tim Scott last night, who is a senator from South Carolina, and the person I respect most in politics. We have to have a justice system that people respect. And we have to be willing to ask tough questions, and we have to be willing to acknowledge that everyone doesn't pursue the justice system, doesn't perceive the justice system in precisely the same way. But it is the most unifying and equalizing force that we have in our culture. The fact that it is represented by a blindfolded woman tells us all we need to know. So you have the highest of all callings. And I'll say this in conclusion: next month, Congress recognizes National Police Week. That's in May. This is April. I'm not going to wait till May. I want to say, as a husband and a father and a citizen, how much I appreciate the line of work that y'all have chosen to go into, and make sure the women and men that work in your agencies know how grateful we are. That won't stop us from doing oversight, but it'll make us cognizant of the challenges that some people have volunteered for to keep other people safe. And with that, I would recognize the ranking member from Texas, Ms. Jackson.